My name is Leah Penniman, and I'm a farmer and food justice activist here at Soulfire Farm in Grafton, New York. Soulfire Farm is a people of color-led community farm, and we're committed to ending racism and injustice in the food system. The way we work on that is by three main projects. The first is that we run a 7-acre farm using Afro-Indigenous sustainable farming methods, and all the food that we produce goes to the folks who need it most in our community. We especially center refugees, immigrants, and people impacted by mass incarceration. And we deliver that food using a CSA model, which is a subscription. Folks who are members receive a full box of fresh veggies and eggs and chicken every Wednesday right to their doorstep, and they can pay whatever they can afford for that food. That's our main and most important thing we do. We also have educational programs. We train several hundred Black, Latinx, and Indigenous farmers every year through our Black Latinx Farmers Immersion program, our youth programs, our apprenticeships, and our workshops. And then our final and third project is community organizing. We work regionally and nationally to change unjust laws that disadvantage farm workers and make it really hard for people of color to access lands. And we also run a regional reparations project so people can transfer land and resources to folks who've been marginalized in the food system. Eggplant is indigenous to sub-Saharan Africa. It is one of the top 3 vegetables in Ghana, Togo, and Benin, where my maternal ancestors are from. So I lived in Ghana for several months, and the eggplant, specifically the garden egg, the white eggplant, is in almost every dish that you would eat. You can eat the eggplant, this particular variety, raw or cooked. Most commonly it's in stews, but it's also baked or just chopped up and eaten fresh. And the leaves are edible of this eggplant, and the leaves are really nutritious. We grow 3 different varieties. We grow the collared eggplant and the garden egg eggplant. So the collared eggplant originated in Asia, but moved into Africa well before colonization. And so it was naturalized in West Africa and came to the United States via that, as well as the Louisiana long green. I think one of the great tragedies of industrial agriculture is the reduction in the number of varieties of vegetables and crops that we eat. And so all of these crops have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of varieties, and many of them are being lost because industrial agriculture favors uniformity. Every single eggplant needs to be this size and this shape and exactly perfect for the mechanical harvesters. And so we lose a lot, not just in terms of our cultural ways, but also disease resistance and climate resiliency. When you have many varieties of potatoes and eggplants and tomato, some of them will survive climatic change and pest outbreaks, and others will not. But when you rely only on one variety, you have what you have with the Irish potato famine, which is, a single fungus comes in and it will wipe out all of these genetically identical crops. And so we do try to plant many varieties of each crop. So we have over 100 varieties of food just here in this tiny farm, whereas an industrial farm might just have 1 or 2. A few of the crops I'm really excited about include molokia. Molokia is a spinach from East Africa that grows really tall. It has succulent, rich, tasty leaves, and it's just packed with vitamins and minerals. It's considered a superfood. In a similar vein, amaranto or amaranth is often thought of as a weed. It's called pigweed around here. It's a crop that is sacred to the indigenous people of what is now Mexico. And you can eat the seed. The seed is one of the few complete proteins in a grain, but you can also eat the leaves, which are rich in vitamins, minerals, riboflavin, niacin. So the entire plant is edible. And it does grow, like a weed in that it's really abundant. It produces so many seeds and it will self-seed itself year after year. I'm very excited about the Moyamensing tomato, which is growing in the high tunnel behind me. While tomatoes are indigenous to this continent, this particular tomato is sacred to African American people. The variety came out of the prisons of Philadelphia and was prepared by the cooks and smuggled out by the chefs in the prison out into the community. So we keep that variety alive and we save seed for it, which is distributed through a friend of ours who has True Love Seed Company in Pennsylvania. Something that happened when Black folks were kidnapped from West Africa and taken across the Atlantic, we didn't have a lot of the greens that we were used to, like molokia and the green of the eggplant. And so the brassica family came in to take its place. So collard greens in particular are sacred to African American people, and greens form the basis of our food pyramid. They're the most important vegetable for us. And so we grow a number of varieties of collards here too. So those are originally a European crop, but popularized and used by enslaved Africans in the South. Well, I started farming when I was 16 years old. I've always had a really close relationship with the natural world. And I got a job at the Food Project in Boston when I was 16. And from that very first day of picking cilantro and having the smell of that sacred crop linger in the creases of my fingers, I was completely hooked on farming, because it's an opportunity to both take care of the environment, but also to focus on social justice and human rights. And I've been farming ever since. When my partner Jonah and I moved with our 2 infant and toddler children to the south end of Albany, we were living in a neighborhood under food apartheid, which means that no matter how motivated you are or how much resources you have, it's really impossible to get fresh food. So there were no farmers markets, no grocery stores, the community gardens had no available plots. And so what we did is we joined the DSA, which was really out of our budget range, but we were grateful for the vegetables. And we had to walk over 2 miles to pick up that share. And experiencing how difficult it was to get fresh food for our own children really motivated us and catalyzed us to create a farm that would provide that food to people who usually would not have access because of unjust policies. We wanted to be in a town that wasn't too far from Albany and Troy because we felt loyalty to our community, and also in a town that was familiar to folks. And so because of the Grafton Peace Pagoda and Grafton Lakes State Park, a lot of people from our community were used to coming out to Grafton, and we didn't want a place that was inaccessible to our folks. And so this land was relatively inexpensive because it is landlocked, so we don't own the driveway. A neighbor had to give us an easement for us to access it. And so we sort of cobbled together our savings from my public school teaching job, purchased the land in '06, and it was just forest and an overgrown field at the time. There was no electricity, no septic, no water, no buildings. So it took us 4 years to just build the basic infrastructure so we could move out here. It was December 2010 that our family moved out, and we opened the farm in 2011 and started right away delivering food to the south end of Albany. The most common way that we use eggplants is to put them in a stew. I like to put them in a mafe, which is a West African peanut stew. And so the eggplant can either be roasted first or just steamed and then ground into a paste, and it becomes part of the base of the stew. My favorite thing to do with eggplants, though, is actually to offer them to Oya. So Oya is a Yoruba deity or force of nature who represents the wind and hurricanes and storms and also transformation. And Oya I was initiated to Oya, so I'm a member of clergy in West African traditional religion. So personally, I'm not allowed to eat eggplant. If I get some eggplant, I have to offer them to this deity, but it's fine for me to grow them and share them with the community. So I will take some of these first fruits and place them on our shrine so that Oya will receive that gift from us and our thanks for all of the support that we get from the wind and from the energies of transformation and change to do the work we do here on the farm. So the Northeast Farmers of Color Network is a new project we formed just a couple of years ago out of loneliness. To be Black and brown folks doing rural work can be pretty isolating because of the demographics of our region, and a sense of hopelessness can creep in. So we started meeting as a mutual aid network and visiting one another's farms to help out on community work days, to give each other encouragement. And at our meeting last year, something that came out of it is a common yearning for lands. While we're very blessed to have title to this land, most farmers in our network do not. They're farming on other people's property or they're renting lands. And that's not even to mention the indigenous people, the Nipmuc, the Mohican, the Schaghticoke, other folks who historically have rights to this land but were driven off by settler colonialism, and who, for the Nipmuc, for example, only own 3 acres now of their original territories. And so we started working together as farmers, as Indigenous folks, to say, how can we get these lands back? You know, in the United States, around 98% of rural land is owned by white people, which is not an accident of history. It's the result of USDA policy, it's the result of colonization, of broken treaties. We need land in order to feed our communities, to have our ceremonies, to hunt, to fish, to retain our culture. And the reparations map was saying, you know, while the government does owe reparations to our people, we can't just wait for that. And so we put projects on the map, farms and sanctuaries and cultural preservation projects that need land, that need resources, and then people who are inspired to share the wealth that honestly they inherited usually from slavery or from colonization, and to share that back to the people who deserve it, can take action. And we've had 7 projects that have received land so far, including Wild Seed Community Farm in Millerton, New York, the Harriet Tubman Freedom Farm in North Carolina. So there's a number of farmers that have received resources from the reparations map, and we hope that that will continue to grow. And at the same time, we're working on longer term policy reforms, you know, that will make that land accessible on a wider scale. Eggplants cross-pollinate, they rely on insects, so we need our honeybees and ants and moths and butterflies to help us keep eggplant alive. They do produce flowers, and once the flower is pollinated or fertilized, then the fruit comes out of where the flower once was. So eggplants are fruits, really, botanically, even though we think of them as vegetables. They're a hot season crop, and so they need to go out well after the last danger of frost. So for us, that's late May that they can go out into the ground. But we start them about 4 weeks ahead of that in the greenhouse. And so by the time they go out in the field, they've already had a head start in a nice heated and protected greenhouse, and then we put them on the black plastic for additional warmth. Something I love about being a farmer is that we're so tied to the cycle of the season. So this time of year is just harvest all the time and distribution of food. The summer is really a busy season for us, both on the farm in terms of the growing the food and taking care of the soil and harvesting, but also it's our programming season. So from May until about October, it's warm enough to camp. And so we regularly have about 30 folks coming through and living with us for the week for our intensive immersions. We have farmers immersions, builders immersions, and a youth immersion. In the winter time, we're doing a lot more work out in the community, visiting schools, giving workshops like canning and preservation in Albany and Troy, as well as touring all around the country, talking about food justice and Black food sovereignty. I have a book that's coming out at the end of October called Farming While Black, Soulfire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land. And we already have 27 stops on that book tour. So we'll be telling stories of the proud history of Afro-Indigenous farming on this continent and elsewhere, as well as giving practical tips for restoring a healthy relationship to land. So that tour is both about, you know, promoting the book, but even more so about sharing education and empowerment in our communities across the nation. There's so many concentric circles of community here. We have our amazing farm team. So I want to shout out Letitia, Demaris, Ceci, and Olive and Larissa, who grow the food that we distribute and who take care of this land. We also have Amani, who helps me with the programs, and Jonah, who's built all this infrastructure, and our kiddos, who have their hands in all of it. And so that community is really an intentional community where we live and work together, and in many ways it's a marriage. And then we have our wider community of Albany and Troy, and then even beyond that, regionally with the Northeast Farmers of Color Network, and nationally with the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. So community means primarily accountability to what we say we care about and what we purport to do. Those are the folks that help make sure that we don't drift away from that mission of providing fresh food to those who need it most and working to create a food system that's just and sustainable and fair for everybody. Something that we're doing here is really catching up to ourselves. So we're not looking to greatly expand the number of people that we feed or acres that we cultivate or folks in our program. We have, in a grand total, about 4,000 people who participate in our programs, and we're a tiny staff. We're about 5.5 full-time equivalents on a relatively small piece of land too. And so we're trying to catch our infrastructure up and our practices up so that we're not doing all of this at our own expense or depleting ourselves as we go or depleting the land and the resources as we go. So my hope is not so much to grow up, but really to grow out. And what I mean by that is we now have over 600 alumni in our Black Latinx Farmers Immersion. We have thousands of alumni in our youth program, is really supporting them with the resources and love and encouragement they need for their own projects. So for example, Keisha Cameron is one of the farmers who went through our Train the Trainer, and she has a farm outside of Atlanta, Georgia. She raises livestock, and what she's doing now, because of her experience here on the farm, is she created an Ubuntu training program, which is to help farmers, to help Black farmers who want to raise livestock sustainably, to have the tools and resources to do that. So my goal for next year is I want to be there for Keisha and all the Keishas who've come through. I want to be able to leverage grant money for them if they need it for their training programs, visit their farms and provide technical assistance, and otherwise support what really is like mycelium, is the fungal hyphae under the ground, helping one another by sharing resources, minerals, knowledge, wisdom, so that we can have many more projects like Soulfire all across the continent.